Okay, good morning, everyone. So let's make a quick start with regards to, the unit that we are discussing, which is resource management. And today we are looking at discussing the learning outcome learning outcome 4, which is the last learning outcome on this particular unit. Now, yesterday, just a quick bit of recap that I want to do is yesterday we covered essentially, discussing about human resources planning, which is the main, aspect of HR, in particular, somebody who's obviously in the department responsible for, managing human resources within an organization. Could be an HR officer, HR manager, and there could be lots of different types of colleagues within the organization, depending on the size and scale. But essentially, when we started the unit, we went into understanding what are resources, different types of resources, then narrowed it down to, in learning outcome 2, understanding what are physical resources and how physical resources are important for the organization, and then further narrowing it down to human resources in learning outcome 3. Now, we have discussed physical resources, administrative, financial resources, any other form of administrative resources which are required to run and operate a business or an organization, narrowing it down to understanding what are physical resources, and then in learning outcome 3 to human resources. And in human resources, we basically looked at the aspect of human resource planning, which is one of the key functions within the organization, specifically when, long-term planning, short-term planning has to be done to see whether the organization has enough manpower, which is employees or staff, to be able to help achieve the goals and objectives which have been set for the organization. So in the NHS, it could be something like reducing the A&E wait times, which could mean increase in the number of ambulances. It could also mean increase in the number of trained staff, which the hospitals might need to take or regions might need to have. And in some cases, it also then leads to a further repercussion wherein you need to look at increase in bed capacity, number of staff and doctors and nurses working within the NHS. And that would be a part and parcel of what the human resource planning team would do under a primary care trust or a PCCT, which basically has and then operates a couple of hospitals in certain areas. So if we look at Manchester, just to give you an example, there are 5 or 6, big hospitals in the Manchester area. But if I look at Greater Manchester, there could be 20, 25 hospitals. But some of these are owned and run by primary care trusts, and they are responsible for making sure. So people, in terms of director of human resources or somebody who's involved in director as a head of workforce planning, would be essentially dipping into this role of what is called human resource planning, because every year there's an increase in the number of patients or increase in the number of resources required to be able to manage, for example, cases which are coming through or patients which are coming through. And in those cases, this human resource planning becomes an important part. Within this, we looked at a very brief example. It's a detailed process. So if we just look at human resource planning, overall as a process, it involves things like recruitment, selection, it includes reward management, incentives, performance appraisals, dealing with unions, or essentially any such action, balloting action, which tends to happen. You look at law and legislation, which the Human Resources Department needs to comply with. And if you pick up just one particular function of HRP, Human Resources Planning, it involves what is planning, organizing, leading, and managing, POLC cycle, and controlling, POLC. So that cycle, typically, if we apply towards, say, one part of the process that we discussed, like recruitment and selection, recruitment typically would include things like drawing up a job description, getting a budgeting approval from within the management, then advertising the job vacancy. It could be job boards, advertising agency. It could be internally advertised on the intranet. Once the advertisement has gone out, you get responses. You should do the shortlisting. Shortlisting leads to interviews. Interview process after that follows through into what is called giving an offer letter. And then the offer letter is accepted. The employee starts. You have a probation period of 4 to 6 weeks, up to 3 months in some cases, or 6 months in some professions. And then once the probation period is over, the employee gets a full-time contract. And that is just the initial part of what we see as what is called recruitment and selection. Then this could be further expanded into training and development, which is one of the other functions. And this is what we looked at in general yesterday in Learning Outcome 3. We also looked at understanding how HR keeps staff motivated. So looking at the introduction of reward schemes, incentive schemes, trips, holidays, employee stock option plans in the long term, and also looking at, for senior management, different types of incentives which could be applied in terms of promotion, talent management, succession planning. And those are the bits which we looked at, why motivational theories are used in order to retain talent within the organization, and the application of these theories in terms of how do we look at applying them in certain situations. For example, in many organizations, we do get to see sometimes they have rewards for 3 years of work, you get a watch, or 5 years, you get something, 10 years, you get. This is a goodwill gesture from the organization to say that they would like to thank you for your work and the commitment that you've shown towards the organization. And all these are a part and parcel of, what are called, more, techniques through which HR implements, planning. And some part of it could be motivational and will be seen working through rewards, incentive schemes, other bits which are launched in order to retain employees and then help drive productivity and loyalty within the organization. We looked at various forms of reward systems, and obviously how do these systems help in monitoring the performance of an employee. So there are lots of different types of performance management techniques. We look at balanced scorecard, we look at management by objectives, we look at 360-degree appraisal. The simplest form which is used within the organization tends to be an annual appraisal, which happens towards the end of the year, end of the calendar year, depending on different organizations. And then how this then is reflected back into training and development, skills enhancement, and also looking at, in some cases, if people are performing well in their role to their best of capacity year on year, then how they become, how the organization progresses them towards a promotion or an upgrade in terms of their job responsibility. Now, after understanding all this, we're going to get into what is called the Learning Outcome 4. And here, the Learning Outcome 4 focuses on how do we effectively use resources which are available to our disposal. Now, as we all know, that resources are always finite. And when we talk about resources, nothing comes in abundance. So when we look at organizations, NHS in example, we do get to hear a lot of times that, some of these resources, when I say resources, NHS is cash strapped. NHS does not have enough trained nurses, or there's a shortage of nurses and doctors. Now, these are resources which are required to run the operations of the organization. And if I talk about a similar case in a business, sometimes what we do get to see is if the management decides that we're going to double the turnover of the organization this year, or we are going to go and pursue aggressive growth, then at some stage, the human resource department would need to get into and understand how do they look at human resource planning so that they know that they have enough people to be able to go after that particular target. So for example, if the turnover has to be doubled from 1 to 2 million, and if there were 3 or 4 sales managers driving it and each carrying a target of £250,000, then if it is going to go to 2 million, then would the HR need to recruit 4 new sales managers, or with the existing managers along with some new recruitment would be able to drive that particular target? And that is where the effective use of resources comes in. So it does not literally mean that if we double the turnover or go after increasing sales or customers or market share for the company or the organization, it does not mean that you will just generally say, okay, and get a sanction, okay, let's recruit 4 new sales managers, because that will add to a lot of expenses in terms of salaries, pensions, and other benefits which will go. And that is what calculation needs to be done at the HR side to see how do they balance this and how do we look at new recruitment and how many do they recruit, but and the existing ones, if we are giving them a delta increase in incentive or bonuses, would they be able to drive a target of, instead of 250, say 350 this year? And that would mean that the incremental sales which are driven, they are also getting rewarded by bonuses and incentives. But at the same time, literally, that means the HR department does not need to recruit 4 new sales managers to carry a target of $250,000. And that similar situation can be applied to, when we talk about financial, administrative, physical, and human resources. So in this particular learning outcome, we are going to be focused on understanding how do we best utilize physical resources, what are the measures through which we can manage them effectively, How do we look at employee management and employee performance, and how and what resources are primarily required, when we talk about effective use of employees within the organization. So, for example, in this case, if we talk about data on employees, we'll be looking at things like absenteeism, sickness. We look at their statistics in terms of how they are performing year on year, how they are performing against the targets. If they are involved in customer-facing situations, then obviously, what is the customer feedback? Is it positive? Is it negative? How many complaints are coming out of it? Or if there are any complaints which are coming, and if you are in the customer services side, just as an example, the department would look at, on this side, looking at the returns, number of returns which are coming through, or complaints which are coming through, if there is a case of mis-selling of products, or if the information provided is not accurate, then those are the bits that would be looked at in terms of measuring the employee performance. In some cases, if it's a business, or if it's the services business, or if it's NHS, for example, here you're going to be looking at, after offering a treatment, does the patient come in for a repeat treatment in a predicted time frame, or does it come, does it cure the illness altogether? So in some of those cases, in sales organizations, this will be seen as repeat sales, or existing customers coming back to buy more products and services from the company. And that would be giving or will be a parameter towards employee performance. We'll also be looking at, making recommendations finally in terms of how do we see improvements in efficiencies can be done when we see organizations which have large number of employees and staff, even contractors or people, when they employ on 0-hour contracts. So here the idea would be, how do we look at best utilization of resources from a point of view of human resources, employees and staff in particular, and how do we see HR's role in trying to drive efficiency across any area, or in this case, any departmental area within the organization. One of the things that you could look at would be, when we look at, just as a tangent example that I would give is, when they look at improving efficiency and increasing productivity. So this could have meanings like, if I look at a haulage company would be looking at transporting goods between warehouses and distribution centers, and then finally onwards delivery to customers. Now, where would they bring in efficiency? First, they would need to bring in efficiency in terms of, there could be various areas, but just analyzing a few. First of the areas would be, they would look at their fleet of trucks or vehicles to see if they are regularly, serviced, updated, and obviously are performing to the utmost capacity. The second efficiency that they would be looking at, so in this case, if the services, the fleet of vehicles are serviced regularly, they have no problems, less breakdowns, that would mean the fuel consumption could be optimal. They could save thousands of pounds on diesel fuel or, petrol fuel. And in some cases, save even thousands of pounds on repairs. If the equipment is used properly, it's not overloaded, and, proper servicing and maintenance is done. So this will give them some sort of incremental savings in terms of efficiency. And here the efficiency is in terms of money saving or cost saving. Now, if the trucks are serviced properly and, regularly, that would mean breakdowns are reduced. That would mean they are in operation throughout the year, which would mean the capacity the company has to be able to move goods from one distribution center to the other does not get affected. The second department that we would look at in terms of improving efficiency or productivity would be looking at how do they optimally move goods. So there would be trucks which are, which have what is called refrigeration or temperature controlled, options wherein grocery stuff, other bits could be moved within specific type of vehicles. And in those cases, you would generally see that, there they would need to look at optimizing in terms of how they move some of the inventory from one location to the other. Can they look at moving it wherein the capacity is full rather than using half the truck or, capacity? And that would mean they're trying to drive efficiency by basically modeling warehousing space, and also looking at clubbing together items which can be moved under one such particular order, wherein customers orders it, or it is moving from one distribution center to the other. The third would be looking at optimal planning on human resources. That could be just thinking with a creative hat on. That could be, looking at making sure that all drivers or all employees working and managing, are working on an 8-hour shift. They are getting the adequate rest. They are also ensuring that they are not stressed. And obviously, in some cases, they have adequate breaks and intervals between when they are driving from one location to the other. This would mean that the employee side of things, which are basically managing in terms of driving the trucks from one location to the other, are ensuring that they are rested and they are taken care of so that they are less off sick. There is less of absenteeism between between the shifts in the drivers. And that would mean that the company has optimal capacity to be able to move and manage and work on all the vehicles. Similarly, I'm just taken an example, plucked it out of the air, and then similarly there could be other areas within the business wherein they could look at finding efficiencies. So one of the things that you could also look at, say, for example, if I take the example of an NHS, normally what happens is when you dial 999, there are ambulances within the area and there are ambulances attached to a particular hospital. Now, most of these ambulance drivers are basically trained on working through the optimal routes for reaching the hospital. And one of the other things that you look at in terms of efficiency that they maintain is they have vehicle trackers on it, which would mean the drivers, and their, say, for example, the ambulance's path could be easily tracked by the hospital if they are bringing in patients, or, if they've gone out on a call and they're